Welcome to Next Steps, a podcast from Black Hawk Church in Madison, Wisconsin, where together we'll take next steps to grow in our relationship with Christ, to be formed into the kind of people He's created us to be, and to better love and serve those around us. Let's jump in.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Next Steps podcast. We are in the middle of our Revelation podcast series, and today we have a couple of guests with us. We have Charles and the elder Chris, who are going to be answering some of your questions. So you guys asked some amazing questions over the past few weeks, and so we have some responses that we're excited about. And then co-hosting with me, as always, the younger Chris. Hey Chris,
I
how are
love how
you?
that caught on, so thank you for that.
Yeah, that's great.
So it's younger Chris, not Chris the younger.
Chris the younger.
Oh, which
I mean,
Yeah.
whatever floats
Yeah.
your boat, as they say. Whichever you want to choose is great. I'll respond. So,
I kind of
Okay.
like the title, like Chris
Yeah.
the Elder,
Chris
Chris,
the
the
Elder,
Younger.
Chris the younger.
I know the
like
younger
that.
Chris. Okay, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
only it's about a month old that we've had these titles now, right? Maybe 2 months.
I think it's working. I think it's sticking.
Is it catching on?
I think so.
Are you
There you go.
regretting hiring me like 6 years ago?
Yeah. I enjoyed hiring you, and all of our wonders about you proved true. So
It's true.
You're a great hire.
Oh, so good. And actually, thanks to those of you who have been sharing with us, just anecdotally, what this Revelation series has been like for you. I know when we started, when we were dreaming about this series and planning it, we had some hopes and dreams and wondered how people would receive this series. And it just seems like y'all have been having a lot of fun with it and also just really wrestling with it in cool ways. A couple of stories that we received I wanted to just share with all of us. So the first person they wrote into us just saying, hey, thanks for spurring me on to study a book that I've always kind of felt afraid of. Because I was afraid of misinterpreting it and felt unqualified to even look at, let alone read. So I am thoroughly loving it. Anecdotally, I was talking with a few other people who had similar stories of some people who have followed Jesus for a pretty long time, have read a lot of the Bible, people that I wouldn't have expected this conversation to have, but secretly they just said, I don't actually read it because it feels like too big of a stretch. Like it just feels weird and confusing and out of reach. And so this series has really opened my eyes and helped to give me tools for really believing that there is some understanding and something that God has for me in this book. And so thanks, to you two, and for I know there's others people who's been teaching. So thanks for the work that you put into this. You guys.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I think I said earlier this is my favorite book of the Bible because it's so weird. I like the weirdness. I like the uncertainty of it, the weirdness of it. I think it's beautiful the way it's put together. So it's just really cool. I think encouraging. At least one of the things that no matter what view you take of it, there's a number of songs in the Book of Revelation, and no matter what view you hold, if you just read those songs over, that's encouraging. Yeah.
A book like this, it like makes you do your work as a teacher too. Like we always do our work, right? And we have a robust teaching team process, but there was extra study and all that went into it, and prayer, and selfishly, I'm sure we have personally benefited from that too, even as we studied it ourselves. So it's been a fun couple of months.
Yeah,
That's good. All right, you guys. Well, let's jump into some of the questions of our congregation, and we'll kind of see where this conversation goes. Okay, so first, I think a great first general question. Somebody asked, hey, I understand that Black Hawk is using a particular model or framework for interpreting Revelation. Can you explain other models, and why has Black Hawk chosen this particular one to use?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think there's some general terms to describe the various models. There is the preterist, which I think reads the book of Revelation as though everything's already happened. And so I know that some of the preterist reading would date the letter to something time before Nero. So it'd be basically 30 years than what most scholars would believe. And they date it quite early. And what they're really saying is, hey, what's coming up, the Nero persecution, that's what's coming up in the 60s. They go with, this is interesting, some preterist readers interpret Babylon as Jerusalem. and the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So it's very interesting reading. So preterist readings would say everything is happening in the first century. It's already happening. Chris, you're more
futurist is another view, and that would be just the opposite, practically. That most of the book, especially 4 through 22, is about the future. And you make a big jump. You divide the book right there, chapter 4. And some futurists read all kinds of things into the text, into the letters, like, oh yeah, this is talking about the rapture of the church, or this is the Great Tribulation. They make everything about the future. So that's probably in evangelical circles in the United States, that probably might be the most popular interpretation. I held that for a number of years.
It is interesting. So I think the futurist reading doesn't have to be, but tended to be wedded with a certain timeline. That's not in the book of Revelation, but kind of constructive bits and pieces from all around the Bible. I mean, you mentioned, say, rapture. Rapture is not in the book of Revelation, but people know about rapture and think about it and has incorporated that into a timeline. So we end up then just kind of making the book of Revelation fit in an existing timeline.
Yeah, and for those of you who are listening to the podcast, we talked about that in an earlier podcast. I think we did. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then there's the idealist. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So the idealist view, I mean, look, I don't like labels that much. What I prefer is simply follow the principle that we always use at Blackhawk, which is the Bible's not written to us, but for us. And here we take the book of Revelation as a letter to 7 churches very seriously. We believe that the 7 churches understood the letter fully. And how they would have understood it is what we're trying to recover. And so is it preterist? If that's the case, great. If it's futurist, that's great. But what we landed on is we think this book is written to encourage the 7 churches, is talking about some of the things they're experiencing, but it's really kind of talking about it in kind of a larger, sweeping kind of a way. Like, hey, you're under oppression. Oh, that's Satan and the beasts and Babylon. That's what you're facing. And so when we take a look at that, we go, oh, well, when we start reading the book of Revelation in the 21st century, we go, oh, it's the same kind of stuff going on in our world. And so we make that move rather than, oh, this is referring to a particular specific event in the future.
Yeah, and it's not a view that is unique to Blackhawk at all. It's a lot of scholars hold to I think it's one of the most popular views in the scholarly world today. Yeah. We recommended Beale earlier. Beale would be a classic example of scholarist, idealist.
Beale's good. Gorman's good. We have a list of these books on the website.
So that's part of the reason why we decided to divide the book up in terms of preaching the way we did, so that we could cover the fantasy material over many Sundays. And then when we're reading the churches, then we are pointing out, hey, look at that. Do you see that? We've already covered that. We covered that. So everything that's written to the churches, in our view, should make sense to them. So if it doesn't make sense to those 7 churches, then that's probably not the sense that we should go with.
Right.
Really.
If they don't understand it, then it's probably not what John meant.
Yeah. And
that's critical.
It doesn't mean that some of the book of Revelation is not about the future almost exclusively. So that's chapter 19, 20, 21, and stuff like that. And they would have understood it that way too. So
right.
So it's not against the futurist.
But they would have understood it in a way that through their understanding.
Yes.
So it's in their language, and the symbolism needs to be interpreted through the lens of a first century reader. So. Yeah.
I know we've had a lot of Atrium conversations about this. So you're saying basically, I mean, this isn't a new thing for Blackhawk. If you've been around for a month, you've heard the phrase, the Bible isn't written to us, it's for us. And it flows out of that philosophy that we're reading it in this way. And like you were saying, I think breaking it up in the way that we did helped us to kind of recapture some of the sense of like, this is a letter that was written to a particular group of people, which at least I know I've studied this at other churches, and that gets lost really easily when you get caught up in all the weirdness of things. But I felt like we were able to kind of hone in on that and put ourselves in that first century, kind of the shoes of those churches and whatnot. But that's something that Black Hawk always does. That's how we approach every book of the Bible.
Right.
Yeah.
It's weird because I think when we do this with most books in the Bible, nobody bats an eye. But when it comes to, I would say, Genesis and Revelation, people go, wait a minute. And then we have to go, hey, we always do this. We're being very consistent in how we read the Bible.
Yeah. I don't know how long we can go on what a bad pastor I've been or something like that. But for years, when I taught Revelation 20, I really ignored the martyrs. You know, and I really got into millennium and stuff like that. I mean, I went back to some of my old notes and old messages, and I didn't hardly, and that's central to what's happening right there in chapter 20. And I would preach whole messages and hardly even mention them. So you have a particular theology that you put those glasses on, and then that's the way you see everything. And so, yeah, I fell victim to that. Probably still fall victim to that kind of thing. But
So
yeah,
basically, you have to go. The 7 churches didn't know about premillennial dispensationalism.
that's exactly right. Yeah, and if the millennium is anything, it's really great for the martyrs.
Yeah.
Whatever. If it's 1,000 years, I don't think it is, but I mean, it's for the martyrs. Whatever. I'm being silly now, but still, yeah.
You guys good if we change gears a little bit? All right, so this is another question that was submitted. And it said, Revelation is heavily, beautifully, masterfully, this is a beautifully stated question, masterfully steeped in Old Testament phrases from the prophets and the Psalms. So that said, would the 7 churches that received this revelation have been made up of mainly ethnic Jews who would immediately understand that imagery and what it was for? Or would they have been made up of mostly Gentile converts where those words might have fallen on deaf ears or kind of felt foreign to them like they do for us sometimes? So anything you could say to that question?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, would they have understood everything that John's trying to say? I mean, John is obviously a Palestinian Jew. We believe he's the Apostle John, and so he followed Jesus. So he would have known the Hebrew Bible inside and out. Most likely, maybe Hebrew Bible, possibly the Septuagint translation, Greek translation,
and that's coming out in the text itself. So
yeah,
as you just read the text itself, there's this
everywhere,
a million
it's everywhere.
Hebrew text allusions. Yeah.
And the question is, would they have understood it? Well, now if we're dating this letter to the early 90s, first century, not 1990s, early 90s of the first century, and then we're talking about. So here's the thing to remember: the New Testament doesn't exist yet. I mean, Paul's letters, late 40s, mid 50s. Most of the letters were written during that time. They were in the process of being collected together, and churches like I'm just imagining. I'm a church in Rome. Like, hey, I heard Corinth, you guys got a couple of letters. That's pretty cool. And the Corinthians like, hey, we got your Roman letters over there. And let's do a little trade. Let's do a little copy. I'm going to get a copy of yours. And the process is going to take time because we don't have photocopies. So those scanners, it takes time to actually copy letters, and then making, and we do know that 2 Peter tells us that Paul's letters got put together as kind of a collection and gets passed around churches. But that's later in the process. And if you look at the Gospels, Mark probably late 60s, Matthew, Luke 80s, and then John, we're thinking about the 90s. And they got put together later. So we're kind of in that time period where New Testament is being pulled together. So if you're a church in one of these 7 churches, what are you studying? What are you reading? You'd be reading the Septuagint. You'd be reading the Old Testament, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. So regardless of whether you're Jewish or Gentile, you know the Old Testament really, really well. Unlike us. These are people who only have the Old Testament, and it's the only way they can understand Jesus is through the Old Testament.
Yeah, and in Colossians 4:16, Paul writes, "After this letter has been read to you, see that it is also read in the church of the Laodiceans, and that you, in turn, read the letter from Laodicea." Mm-hmm. So we see that's a classic verse of these letters, the apostles, one of them circulated, moving around, but hey, you don't have that letter that I wrote to the Laodiceans. They have it. Now you have to go get it.
Yes.
So
Let me get a copy.
there you go.
Yeah, and it's just interesting because if we actually pay attention, Pauline letters are loaded with Old Testament imagery, Old Testament concepts, Old Testament citations, and that's to Rome, which we know is predominantly Gentile. That's to Galatia, in the letter to Galatians. That's nearly all a Gentile. So no, I think the idea that Gentiles wouldn't understand this, they absolutely would. They absolutely would.
That's good. As we, maybe for these next set of questions that we've gotten, a lot of them are around the idea of maybe what some of these images mean that we might not be familiar with, or some symbols that aren't necessarily from the Old Testament, but it's symbolism. And so I'm going to start working through some of these questions. And so you guys can choose to answer, choose to pass, whatever you want to do. So we'll just start working through some of these. So first question, this person asks, so in the Gospels of both Matthew and Luke, when Jesus is tempted by the devil, he's brought to the wilderness, the temple, and the high mountain. Similarly, during his revelation on Patmos, John is taken to those same locations, and only those locations as far as I can tell. Is this a connection that this person should be making or not?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. First of all, just commend you for paying such careful attention to reading the text.
Yes.
That's really good.
Really
Awesome.
cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, very cool.
But I would say this. I would make the argument that John, I think there's definite connection to the Old Testament. Revelation is a massive theme of the Old Testament. So is the temple. So are high mountains. And all three have tremendous biblical theology significance. And the fact that both Matthew and Luke, they're making this. So basically, let me back up. John is not referring to Matthew and Luke. Matthew and Luke and John in Revelation, they're all making reference to the Old Testament. And they're sharing the same kind of library of motifs that they're drawing from. So,
because if you were what you just kind of said, the Gospels were really being written about the same time in general. Mark maybe a little earlier, but they would have necessarily. These wouldn't have been common kind of pieces yet, the Gospels.
Right.
At this time.
They didn't have a Bible like we have a Bible.
Right. They don't have a concordance. But the thing, like I said, I think the right recognition is that these are major motifs. Right. There's so much Old Testament understanding about the temple, high mountain, and wilderness. It's a repeated motif.
All right, here's another one. What is the little scroll in Revelation 10? I think it shows up especially at the end of that chapter. Why was John told to eat it? Either of you want to take that one?
Yeah, so that's a classic passage. So again, most likely this is a reference to something in the Hebrew Bible, in Ezekiel. So we actually did a series called Eat This Book years ago. I don't think it's 2012 or something like that, based off of Ezekiel, some verses in Ezekiel 3. So yeah, the idea here is that there could be two levels of meaning here. Primarily, John's consuming the scroll signifies passing on the revelation to him, like in the Ezekiel passage, and his own commission to prophesy, to do that. At the same time, the message also concerns probably the church's place in the mystery of God, kind of to be consummated, that it's going to be bitter, judgment's going to come, it should make us sick. So one of the things that I like about that verse is that if it's related to the scroll of judgment, then the whole idea of judgment is sweet in one way, but it is hard in another way.
Yeah. I think that's something. I mean, it's right in the text. I think that's what we like about this is that eating a scroll. I think Ezekiel's like, okay, you're supposed to embody it, right? God it's basically a way of translating written to spoken. Yeah. Now you can eat it. Now you can prophesy. Now you can speak.
Now you can speak.
And you can eat something, and now it comes out.
Part of you.
But I think that juxtaposition, judgment is at all times sweet and sour.
So You
right?
gotta. That's why I like the Book of Revelation.
Yeah.
Isn't that?
Yeah.
That's a killer. That's a killer right
It's
there.
beautiful.
Isn't it?
Well,
Yeah.
not beautiful. I mean, it's just profound. It's like, okay, judgment. Yeah, they're gonna take it. They're gonna get theirs. Oh, it's gonna be sweet when you first taste it, and then it's gonna go, oh wow, that's destructive. That is painful. That is. Wow, look at that. What's going on there? And there's that regret. There's that seeing all the suffering. You're just like, wow. And that's the nature. And the text acknowledges that beautifully. So,
Well, if you keep reading, just one more little chapter, you get to two prophets or two witnesses who were killed, presumably by the beast, refused burial, and came back to life. And so this person says, who are they?
Yeah. So this gets back to what we said originally. It takes, your framework of interpretation. So if you're a futurist, and then most likely you're going to see the measuring as like a real thing. These are two human beings, these prophets. The temple's a solid thing. It's all going to happen in the future, in the tribulation. It makes perfect sense once you buy that framework. So if you don't buy that framework, however, then these don't have to be like two individual people. And we get permission to doing that from like Jesus calling the church a lampstand, in chapter 1. So it's like, okay, like what's going on with that? So is this really a real temple? Is this really real measuring line and all those kind of things? So then because we were just saying before the podcast, then we could speculate.
yes.
We could speculate about what that might be and all that, but then that would be speculation on our part. If it doesn't say it in the text, and we don't have a solid Old Testament reference to it, then we just have to say, it might be this, but I'm not really sure.
And that's a great question, because I think so many people, because of the fact that this genre, John, in fact, says, hey, this symbolizes that, right? Dragon is Satan. Lamb is Jesus. Lampstand, church. Does that mean we do that with every detail? Is this I think the term, I know people don't read allegories very much anymore, but, it used to be like this Christian spiritual classic, Pilgrim's Progress. John Bunyan, not Paul Bunyan.
Different people.
Different
Bunyan.
people. Sorry.
That's funny though.
Yeah. So you imagine Paul Bunyan writing this. No. And it's like, and it was written to have every little detail symbolizes something outside the story. And so the question people have is, well, is the book of Revelation really meant to be an allegory where every little detail means something? Mm-hmm. Or is it only when John specifies? So that's you basically have a whole spectrum way of reading this. And for what Chris just said is, when John spells it out, we go with that. And when you have an Old Testament citation, like the way we have it with a scroll with Ezekiel, and we go, okay, I think we know what that means. Then we're like, okay, we'll go with that. But once you not really working with any of those two things, it becomes a little hazier. We're not working with 100% certainty or 90% certainty anymore. Then we kind of go, let's hold off and let's just be, I think, hermeneutically humble, and let's not speculate. Now I know there's a lot of details here, and here's the thing: is that I've been thinking about reading the book of Revelation and trying to visualize. And when you paint pictures, you put in a lot of details. And I know that in this day and age, we're losing the ability to visualize things purely from words, because we have shifted more and more from a word-based society into an image-based society. Back when I was in the 80s, I was reading Lord of the Rings. And when I was reading it, I can imagine the entire field of Pelennor, and I can imagine the orcs, and I can imagine the cavalry, I can imagine the war scenes. It's all in my head. And now that Peter Jackson has made it, I probably can't anymore. Now, what I just visualize is the movie he made. And that's what we're talking about, is when you're talking about the book of Revelation, talking about first century, this is an oral culture in which when people describe something, the hearers go, I can see all of it. And this is meant to be experienced as kind of a visual imagination literature. And so some of the details mean things, others we don't think mean anything.
And it's hard for us to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just really hard for people to go, I just don't know. You have all these books on your shelves, all these commentaries, all these things. I just don't know.
Yeah.
So that's hard for people to say because you look ignorant and all that kind of thing. But a lot of these things, I don't really know.
Yeah.
But you can follow the theme of the Babylon and the beast and the lamb, and the fantasy can take you into this area where you feel like, okay, I could see where that actually could be more than just two people and what's going on there and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's not really an answer. But.
No, it's helpful even just in how we think, because there's tons of symbols and we can't answer all of the questions about these, but helpful to keep in mind as we're trying to interpret these things.
It's the advantage, too, that a lot of another view would have, like a futurist view, when you speculate, because you lay it all out. And people are attracted to that. Yeah.
People are attracted to certainty.
Certainty.
Certainty
Right.
is
Right.
Yeah, all laid out.
Mm-hmm.
This is what it means.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On that note, should we do a couple more of those?
Yeah, let's do a couple more.
Just
Yeah.
for fun.
We can just say, I don't know, and then it's going to be a short
And then we'll move
podcast.
on.
Yep, next one will be a short podcast.
Yeah.
I'm jumping around a little bit. We had a whole list of them. I'm picking one out here because I've heard this question come up a couple times. Symbolically, what is the seal that is placed on the 144,000 tribes of Israel in Revelation 7? I'm reading the question as written. Or how does it compare with the mark that is placed on people in Revelation 13? So what's the seal? How does it compare with the mark from Revelation 13?
You can take it.
So first of all, 144,000, that's if you know your perfect squares, that's 12,000 times 12, right? So it's kind of a nice little, very beautiful number. And I know that, once again, okay, we don't think it's just going to be 144,000 people in the future, and I would not take the number as being like literal. In terms of the seal, though, I think this is where we actually see the seal later on as well. Like the people who are on Team Lamb, they receive the seal, and I think that there is okay. If you ask me what the seal actually looks like, I don't know, but it is a parallel to the mark of the beast. Mm-hmm. That is the idea. There's a way in which each team has a uniform, has a marking. Now we tend to want to make it literal. Is that a tattoo? Is that I don't know, some kind of embedded chip? We just kind of want to go there. And I think the idea is that no, you're on this team. You're marked. Now, is it a physical marking? I don't think so. But I think there's very much clear the idea that each person who is a follower of Christ is marked spiritually, marked with the Holy Spirit, marked with something that says they're on the side of the Lamb.
Yeah, the 144,000 people in the idealist camp interpret that as the idea of completeness, like he was saying, this squared, like the completeness thing. So it's the totality of God's people throughout the ages. That's an idealist kind of a view of what this, not a literal 144,000. 666 is the opposite of that, antithesis of the completeness. And so they're, yeah.
So the mark and the seal, what you're saying, Charles, whether it's a literal physical thing or not, it's showing whose team they're on, who their allegiance is to in this case.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Anything more on that one, you guys, or should we jump to another one? All right.
Well, with that question, I feel like in my mind, for those of you who also grew up in youth group in the 90s, I feel like Left Behind books are the storyline is going through my head. So that's what I blame. So those are the only answers I have is what happened in those books? What did it mean? Anyway, it's funny, but only those of you who have read those books get what I'm talking about. All right, so let's do one more. Is that what you said?
Sure.
Okay, let's go. I don't know. Let's go golden bowls. So are the golden bowls of God's wrath in Revelation 16 related to the golden bowls full of incense in Revelation 5:8?
Isn't this great, you guys? Just getting pop quiz on specific
Random
details of
revelation.
Revelation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to go on a limb and say no, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think the one in 5:8
Sure.
relates to the praises of God, the prayers of God's people, right? That's what we're talking about. The seven bowls relates to we got the seven seals, the seven trumpets. There's just a series of these judgments.
Yeah.
So I do not believe that we're talking about the same thing.
Don't think so either.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So next question. This is not exactly related to imagery, but it's still more of a general question. So this person says, throughout the book of Revelation, it's clear that some things Jesus wants John to see and witness to, along with multiple times he's told to write something down. So sometimes, hey, write this down is what John hears. So why then is John told by an angel to not write down what he saw at a few points? Particularly, this person references chapter 10, verse 4. Is this somehow related or paralleled by the instances where no one is worthy to open the seals?
Yeah, this is a strange passage about the seven thunders.
Yes.
I like that.
I feel like that could be a band name.
Seven thunders.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
a roller coaster.
Oh, a
Yeah.
roller
I
coaster.
don't
Or
Yeah.
Revelation. Okay, a Revelation theme
Ooh,
park.
a theme park.
Yeah.
Why hasn't Disney World come up with
I
that yet?
know.
Yeah.
How fun would that be?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Not
mean,
very fun.
yeah, no kidding. Seven thunders. I like it. It could be a really good. We need a jacket that has seven thunders on the back of it.
Oh,
Yeah.
some merch. Blackhawk
Some
merch.
merch,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess the bottom line is I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Again, we're not told. It moves us towards mystery more and the weirdness of the apocalypse. I guess that would be my answer. We just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, to not write it down, as he says, to seal it up, it's basically you're not going to find out. And so the question of why is interesting because clearly you're not supposed to know.
Yeah.
So there are things. So I guess if there are things that you're not supposed to know, it does convey something narratively. That is to say, hey, there's more to what I'm saying than I'm telling you. I mean, the way Gospel of John ends that way, right? Like there's so much that Jesus did that I did not write about. That's how Gospel of John
That's
ends. Like
true.
I didn't write about any of this stuff. There's
Yeah.
more because if it's written, the book, the world cannot hold on to this. But it's too big. The book is going to be too big, right? And that's how the Gospel of John ends. And I think there's elements of this that's kind of conveying, hey, there's a lot more to this than I've shown you,
And
and that's just how you.
it's mystery.
It's
there's
mystery.
a lot to
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
is it 8:181? He opens the seventh seal, and there was silence in heaven for about half an hour.
Wow.
Like why? Like why?
What?
Why? Right?
Like what?
But it's just
is
cool.
going on here?
cool.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Suspense.
Suspense, right? What's going on? Yeah, exactly.
Suspense, yeah,
Suspense,
yeah, it
So,
just-
so to me, by
Yeah.
withholding something, you're actually conveying a kind of a broader, bigger story.
Yeah, and then
So-
then he starts, and then I saw seven angels. You know,
Yeah.
it to me it just pulls you in. But I don't know exactly why there was silence. Yeah, narrative tool, but it's a cool narrative tool.
Yeah.
All right, so, let's switch gears a little bit. So we talked about metaphors and imagery and all that kind of stuff. Let's talk about some various topics related to judgment. So here's the next question. This person writes that they remember watching a video when I was in Crew years ago on Revelation, and they referred to different rooms in heaven and that we will be judged for how well our life reflected Christ. They may be talking about the Bema seat of judgment. I think I was also a Crew person. I remember seeing things like this as well. But they continue, will we be judged, or not will we? According to this video, we will be judged accordingly and put in separate areas. But I don't think this makes sense from what we have been learning and how I understand things now, but I wanted clarification. We are judged simply on whether we believe and live in partnership with Christ, not based on how good we are, correct? That's their question.
Huh.
I even think that even not in Crew, but because I wasn't in Crew, but I think there was a general maybe idea teaching of even what like neighborhood in heaven are you going to be in? Like it's all good, but like
Yeah.
depending on how good you are, how faithful and obedient, like maybe you'd get like bigger.
Yeah.
Bigger
I mean, I
stuff?
would say
Yeah.
oceanfront property, but there's no sea.
Right.
So
That's
That's
so
in the good
sad.
place. You get different size
That's
houses
so-
depending
Yes,
on.
yes.
But there's also
That's so Charles
Yeah.
right there. I
Yeah.
could do that, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but
You know,
crowns
I
and
str-
rewards in heaven, all of those are
So it
things,
gets
yeah,
into
so-
all that. I don't know the movie they're talking about, what they saw. It might be the John 14 passage, many mansions. In my Father's house there are many mansions, that kind of thing. Might be that. So it's just speculation as to what they're really getting to. But it gets into the larger conversation about grace and faith and works and judgment and things like that.
sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay.
Because I feel like, I don't want to throw a crew under the bus. Because
For sure.
this is absolutely not. So I don't know anything about the video, and but I think we're so much working with this underlying kind of story of it's all about how you lived your life, and if you do good, you're going to get rewarded for it. Right. And then if you do bad, you're going to be punished for it. Oh, no. You believed in Jesus. So even though you did bad, you're still on the side of Jesus. Therefore, you're in heaven. But now, if everybody's in heaven, you all go into exactly the same place, that doesn't feel terribly fair. We need to find a way to differentiate people who are in heaven. So we need to have better rooms or better, suites. I don't know, mountaintop suites. I mean, there's still going to be mountains, right? And so... And I think what we want to try to do, I think the book of Revelation does, is it challenges that underlying notion. Right, because and I've said this elsewhere, and I'll say it again. I believe that our greatest reward is to be able to be like Jesus. That's our greatest reward. Because that is the greatest thing possible for a human to be. Jesus is the greatest human being. I get to be like him and be closer and closer like him. That's my reward. And so following Jesus, I get that reward. So the idea then somehow because I did a better job of living like Christ, I'm going to get some other reward for it. Yeah. That feels weird.
Yeah.
That feels like following Jesus is a means to an end.
Yeah.
Versus the end of self.
Maybe it comes out of an idea of there are so many maybe fun things that aren't what God desires for us. And so if we're going to give those up here in this world, then there better be a reward for that, because it feels like it's more about what we're maybe the focus is more what we're giving up and not really understanding the true joy that comes with this close.
Do you want to talk?
Well, I want to camp out here for a second, because I think what questions like this or videos like this sometimes get at. Let's take reward out of it for a second. Like, I think of 1 Corinthians 3, Paul talks about how if anyone builds on, there's two different kinds of foundations, whether gold, silver, costly stones, or there's wood, hay, or straw, and the work will be shown for what it is, and it will test each person's work. And then there's this whole idea of like certain people will get to eternity and hear, well done, good and faithful servant. So is there reward or not? Is there like a giving of a personal account? You're saved, but you're standing before Jesus and giving an account for your life and the way that you stewarded your gifts and that kind of thing. I think that's some of what maybe this question gets at. Like your eternity is secure, but are we going to stand before Jesus and give an account for the way that we lived our lives in some way or another?
Yeah, we will. You got the younger Chris got to write what the older Chris was going to, because in all fairness, I mean, there are a number of New Testament passages, and you mentioned a few, that go right at this whole thing. Romans 14:10 is another one. You then, why do you judge your brother or sister, or why do you treat them with contempt? For we will all stand before God's judgment seat. 2 Corinthians 5:10, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each of us may receive what is due us for the things done while in the body, whether good or bad. So the New Testament itself presents these verses that can be very confusing. So let me just kind of back up a little bit, and you guys can jump in whenever. This gets into a large, historic, long theological conversation that the church has had for centuries. So, and we're not going to solve it here in this little podcast, but it's all about the balancing of these two things. And I thought, as I studied this, I thought Ephesians 2, 8 through 10 really does a good job of putting both things together, this idea of faith and grace and work. So here's Ephesians 2, 8 through 10. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith. It's not from yourselves. It's the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. But then he goes on to say, for we are, and I love that for, this is reason, for we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared for. So they're not opposite. They go together. Good works are not the cause of our salvation. That's exclusively the work of Christ. We don't have what it takes to please the Holy God. Rather, that good works demonstrate what God has actually put into us to do to look like his son, because the goal is transformation and conforming to the image of his son. That's kind of, that said a lot there, but anyway. Charles?
But I think that's an interest. I mean, having Chris the younger there, and first of all, that's really helpful, Chris the elder. But Chris the younger, I think the distinction is important, because I was reading this question very much focused on rewards. Right, you get nicer room, you get a better area, and they're like, well, okay, wait, this is I think going off in a track, do good, and you're going to get a better place. But the idea that what did you do with your life? Right? As a Christ follower, your salvation is not at stake, but how did you live your life? Is there an accounting of that with Christ, with God? And what would that accounting be like? And I think that's something that the Bible talks about. It's like, yeah, you've been given gifts. You've been given talents. You've been given life circumstances. What have you done with it?
What did you do with it?
What did you do with it?
That's the whole. That is the overall thrust. The idea that there will definitely be an accounting and a judging.
Yeah, but what we're not talking about is therefore you're going to go to hell.
No,
that's not what we're talking. I just want to clarify that.
That's John 5.
It also doesn't lead to a better room or a better area in heaven. What it does have is, hey, this is everything that's happened is going to get. There's going to be a conversation about this. I don't know if it's a private conversation. Is it in front? I mean, this is what people get a little nervous about. Yeah,
Just
but there is an accounting of this to go. Okay, that happened. Why? Well, actually, it's interesting because the problem with our imagination is this. Okay, this is my view now. Okay, with our problem with our imagination is we imagine heaven's an endpoint. And we think, oh, that's it. We all became perfect and it's all done. And that is, I don't see heaven quite that way. I see heaven as a place of continued growth. And so you get there and it's like, oh, here's what you did with your life. You need to see it clearly. Now let's move forward. Yeah. I think there's a sense of, okay, clarity. There's a sense of, okay, you did not do that there. You did this, but look what you did here. Wow, okay. And the reality is the accounting is going to be very different for all of us. We're going to be very surprised because people come from very different backgrounds. They have very different experiences. And for them to move in certain directions, we're going to go, that person's not very spiritual. And the God's like, oh, that person has overcome an incredible amount of difficulties to get to where they are. And we wouldn't even know it. We wouldn't tell. We couldn't be able to tell. Wow. So I think about those kind of things. I think if heaven is a place where we move forward toward eternity, then having a clear accounting of what happened on earth in our lives, that would be very helpful and very necessary.
I'm going to keep going with another one, but related. We've been talking about more of a personal, individual kind of accounting or judgment. One community group asked this. Can you expand on what was taught that the judgment mentioned in Revelation 6 is more of a 30,000-foot judgment of evil and not a judgment of evil individualistically? Anything you guys want to?
I saw that something that you wanted to expand on.
That was your bad.
It looks like you're asking your
question.
Yeah.
Well, what I was trying to communicate in that message, I mean that passage. This is hard for us to understand, but there's so much in Revelation that is addressed corporately at the evils of Babylon as an entity, as an institution, as the systems of evil. And so we want to jump to the individual stuff right away, right? And this individual accounting and all of that kind of stuff. But God is fed up with the evil of Babylon and the bloodshed and the persecution of martyrs and all of these things. And he's hearing these martyrs cry out for vindication and for judgment. And so, yeah, he's going to bring those evil institutions and empires down. And that's, at least as I read that passage, what he's focused on is this corporate, community-based judgment of evil, and not necessarily individuals. Of course, individuals make up communities, but really trying to get at the whole of these big empires and institutions and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's the text in 15, chapter 6, verse 15. Yeah, then the kings of the earth, so that's plural, the princes, plural, the generals, that's plural, the rich, the mighty, everyone else, both slave and free, hid in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. They called on the mountains and the rocks, fall on us, hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne, from the wrath of the Lamb. So it is a corporate right there. I mean, it's corporate right there.
It's a hard thing for us to deal with. First of all, I want to distinguish two types of judgment. There is in-history judgment. There's judgment that happens in the course of human history. And of course, there's the final judgment before the throne of God and for the judgment, eternal destiny. I think it's pretty clear from the book of Revelation that the final judgment is individualistic. Every person is judged by what they do. Are they on the side of Satan or on the side of the Lamb? Right?
And
that's pretty clear.
Is their name in the book?
And
all that.
It's
Those
very
are
individual.
all metaphors toward individual.
But in history judgment, this is where I think we have a hard time with the Bible. And then this is not just about Revelation; it's everywhere in the Bible. God judges nations. God judges people groups. God judges entire clans and families and entire cities. He does that, and we have to. It challenges us, especially as Western individualistic people. We don't like it. We think collective judgment seems unfair, but I think that's because we don't see from God's perspective, and that's just how it goes. God says you're more interconnected than you realize. You are responsible. Am I my brother's keeper? The answer is yes. And so when you don't take action in your society to push back against injustice, when you go, "Oh, that's somebody else's problem," God's like, "Yeah, you're part of this too. You're part of it." So,
as a related question to that, I think as it relates to in history judgment, a couple of the questions, I'm just going to kind of push them all together. They talk about how maybe we see judgment as, I think we talked about war, famine, conquest, death. But they were saying, well, I mean, if you look at the world historically, maybe even today, having some examples, it seems like the people who are oppressing, who like the evil, like what is evil, who is good, like why are these what we would call maybe innocent people, maybe people who are marginalized or poor, they're really suffering the most because of these things? Is that God's judgment when it's like the rich and the powerful seem to be unaffected by some of these things like famine and war? It doesn't hurt them. So how do we make sense of that? Is every time there's a war or a famine, is it God's judgment on a people? Or is there other explanations for that as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it gives me pause. I'm not sure how this will go over, but that question just touches on the greater problem. The amount of human suffering in the world is incalculable. Our newspapers and media are the tip of the iceberg in terms of suffering that's happening in the world. And I think we're on thin ice when we say this thing that just happened, that tsunami there, or this is God's judgment on Babylon for sure. Then I think we're moving into speculation at that point, and I would be kind of short to say that. On the other side of that, though, is that we do know that God does judge institutions and systems. I'm not trying to. Maybe I'm kind of. I just want to be cautious about what we say is God. I just want to be cautious about that because I don't want to say, thus saith the Lord, this is the result of God's thing. I want to, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that.
No, I totally agree. I think, even the book of Revelation itself, right? Some of the suffering comes from the dragon, the beast, Babylon. Right? Babylon's one killing everybody. So you're like, wait, that suffering right there, is that God's judgment or is that satanic action?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so the Revelation has two agents.
There's
you have
two
the
categories,
agency of dragon doing the killing, and then you have the lamb and God's judgment. It's like, well, wait a minute. So is every suffering in life one or the other? And that becomes right with those kind of questions. And I would not. I don't think the Book of Revelation is making that claim.
Yeah.
I don't think it's making that claim.
Yeah, I think about Ben's message, which as we're recording this was last Sunday. He's talking about, I think, to the church of Smyrna, been talking about, hey, you've been suffering, but it's not because you did something wrong. It's because you've done something right. Like there's suffering at
Right.
The question gets into the larger issue. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do good things happen to bad people?
Yeah.
And, it again, is the literature that we're reading really answering that question specifically? I mean, Psalm 73 is a classic example of the psalmist struggling with why good things are happening to bad people and bad things are happening to good people. Yeah. So it's a tricky thing.
It's a big topic. I think this is where you're dealing with the Bible speaking in almost in dialogue with each other. It's kind of like a choir. And the different parts of the Bible are singing different parts when it comes to this idea of suffering. Because if you read through, say, Deuteronomy, it's like, okay, obey me, you'll be blessed. You're gonna have a lot of rain in your land, and if you disobey me, you're gonna get punished, and famine. Okay, that's cool. But then God doesn't okay, and then if you really disobey me, I'm gonna exile you. But then people disobey, and God doesn't exile them because He's being gracious. Okay, how gracious are you gonna be? Well, eventually you get to, this is the generation that gets punished for all the stuff that happened to them before, and the people are going, well, that doesn't seem very fair. How come we're being judged based on what our grandparents say? Right? So Jeremiah, Ezekiel, they're all having passages like this, and the book of Job comes along and says, some suffering is because God has a purpose for it. It's doing something for God. You have no idea why.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a glimpse of what's going on. I'm having a little conversation with Satan, and it's like, whoa, what? And so Job suffers. And it's not we know he didn't do anything wrong. It's for a different purpose. And then we get to the New Testament, and Jesus suffers, right? And this is where, right? So it's just like you just kind of the suffering question is complex. And you would say, hey, and you're absolutely right, Chris. You cannot say, hey, you're suffering because of this, because you have no idea. That's actually, if Job tells you teaches you anything, is you do not know. Okay. But the flip side, there are a lot of different reasons why suffering happens, including the generic chaos of a world that is broken.
Human greed.
You can do human. You can just do the world.
Yeah.
The world is chaotic. And I pointed this out the other day to somebody. I said, look, is hurricane evil? Is earthquake evil? And I said, only to people whose bodies can be broken. To a resurrected person, not at all. It's a matter of perspective. So natural evil that we think, oh my gosh, look at the earthquake, look how many people died. Well, that's because humans rebelled against God. If they didn't rebel against God, if they have eternal life, that wouldn't be a problem at all. It's like, okay, so that changes our understanding of the nature of what is evil, what is chaos, what is suffering. We have a lot of we have a broken world in which there's just natural randomness, diseases, and so forth. Then we have humans doing horrible things to each other. Then we have systems doing horrible things to each other. We have systems going after Christians. We have God judging these systems. All of that's happening at the same time.
Yeah, I think that passage, it opens up something new for us that most of us don't think about often, that God could actually use war and famine and these things to execute his judgment. And that raises a lot of questions like this. We talked about a lot of them as a teaching team during these weeks and just couldn't get into all of the nuances of things. But yeah, what I was not trying to insinuate that all of the things like that we see in the world are evidence of God's judgment. As we've all been saying, like it's a risky endeavor to try to read the mind of God and to speak for him when it comes to putting tags or labels on these different things, because there are all sorts of reasons for suffering and war and famine. And I struggled with that too as I drove around and preparing for that particular message. thinking about the poor and the vulnerable and things going on in the world right now. And it's like, I had to wrestle with God. Like, yeah, God, it's hard for me to believe that this is you doing this, given all of the innocent lives that are being taken. But as we're talking about, there's a whole lot of reasons for why suffering and death and all of that
But
happens.
the good thing in the apocalypse is that we know the judgment will happen one day.
Yeah.
God will be the one
Yep.
who brings it. He can see through motives. He understands. So there will be an accounting. It's not like there's never going to be an accounting. There will be an accounting someday.
Yep. All right. This has been great, you guys. As we try to kind of tie a little bit of a bow on this and head toward the finish line, what does this mean for us today? Basically, that's the category of these last couple questions. So, in Revelation 13, here's another question. It describes the beast and the mark of the beast. In a modern world where technology, power structures, and ideological possession are ever present, how can we recognize beasts in our own time?
Now we're stepping out of the world of Revelation into our own time, and we're asked to speculate.
As pastors,
As
in
pastors.
this
At
in this
Black Hawk
community
Church.
of Black Hawk Church.
Yeah, I'll take a shot at it, Chris. If you want me to go first.
Yeah.
I would say first of all, the way it describes the two beasts. One is about power. Power is huge. Be careful about power, especially tyrannical power. The way it described the first beast. It is a beast that's powerful. It's military. It's scaring everybody. Everybody's worshiping it. Watch out. Watch out for tyrannical power. And we have countries in the world that are like, okay, the way they exercise power over their citizens, you're getting beast-like, just like vibes and red lights flashing all over the place. And then, of course, there's something very explicit, which is, are they opposing the church? So I'm going for the low-hanging fruit here. Any government or system that is exercising oppression, especially religious oppression against churches, beast. Babylon, boom, boom. It's just flashing red light, piece of cake to recognize.
Anything that pulls us away from being obedient to Jesus is the work of Babylon doing its work. So wealth, our possessions, those kind of things. This podcast will probably be after I finish the book, and so Laodicea is a classic example of that. So our wealth, material things can blind us. Money is not bad. Wealth is not bad in and of itself. Abraham was extremely wealthy, so was Job and other people. It's the pull that it has on our hearts away from obedience to God. It blinds us. We don't think we need God. I mean, if you're getting raises and you got new cars and new houses and full storage units, I mean, life is fine. You're numb to pain that's in the world. You're numb to a lot of pain that's in your own life. So again, anything like power, the lust for power, the lust for money, all these kind of the 7 deadly sins, I guess that's what we're talking about. And all of those things can be a fruit of Babylon, and they can pull us away from being obedient to God.
Yeah. And so this is where you're getting to between the coercion versus the seduction. Right? If you're not being coerced away from God, you're being pulled away from God in ways that you're not aware of. You think about ideologies of our culture. Ideologies culture about, hey, be yourself, be you. I mean, it's like just like something, you be you, you do you. It's like that's so pervasive. And then you're like, the Bible never says that. It says, be God, be like God. It's just a completely different vision of humanity. And you're like, oh, that ideology has become pervasive. We think, oh, that's normal. That's not normal, folks. Okay, 500 years ago, people didn't think you do you. This is a ideology of the modern age, of the postmodern age. It's like this is come out. You do you basically is you're your own God, right? It's self-deification. It's like, whoa, how do we get to a point in the development of culture where we come up with ideologies like this? And I would say that's the second beast. He's coming up with some really cool belief systems that's disseminated in our culture, in our social medias, and just reinforced over and over again, so that we swim in it and we think that's just normal. Of course, I'm supposed to live my life to express me. Of course, that's my calling in life.
Right.
Yeah.
And the way of the Lamb is, I am crucified with Christ. No longer I who live, but Christ lives in me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe a quick follow-up question. So you talked about power, deception, things that pull us away from obedience to Christ. It seems like Babylon is also full of a lot of just injustice in general, bloodshed, crushing the poor and the marginalized. Are like all acts of injustice by powerful systems and institutions, are those a mark of the beast or of Babylon as well, even if it's not directed toward the church? Or how should we think about injustice, especially as it relates to some of these things we've been talking about with the poor and the marginalized and the oppressed and all of those kinds of things? Is that a mark as well?
And that's a great question. I think any kind of a system, and which includes ideologies as well as governmental powers, military powers, coercive powers, anything that's in some ways dehumanizing God's creation, God's people. Oh, not just God's people, humanity. Any human being created to be the image of God. If there's ideology that dehumanizes them in various ways, that's kind of keeping them from being able to flourish as God's children, you're getting into Babylon territory. You're getting into demonic territory.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Yeah, so go ahead.
It's not really about bigness or power. Just think about Rome, okay? Yeah. They united all kinds of different countries with this common language. They united countries with the common roads, and they did a lot of really, really good things. So just because they're big and powerful doesn't mean everything they're doing is against humanity.
Yeah.
And it's just true with every other large empire or anything like that. They're not. But at the same time, they can use those roads or use that language to dehumanize people. And I don't know.
I mean, I think easily of poverty as being a way of dehumanizing, because you have millions upon millions of people who are barely surviving. I mean, when you visit different places, and I don't want to name countries, when you start visiting places where you're seeing this kind of intense poverty, where people are not able to come close to living out what God has created them to do. They're not coming close to be able to flourish. And you go, what is happening there in these kind of places? You look at a system of slavery in various parts of the world as well as our country. It's like in the past. These systems are intentionally dehumanizing. And you go, like, which ideology came up with that, right? But like, who's driving those kind of ideologies to do this to other human beings? So no, I absolutely believe that dehumanizing systems are Babylonian in nature.
Yeah. The work of the dragon.
Work of the dragon.
That's helpful. We have time for one last one.
One more question.
Bring us
All
home.
right, you guys. The end of Revelation doesn't end with destruction, but with the vision of the New Jerusalem. So what does this tell us about the nature of transformation and the ultimate purpose of human history?
That's a big question.
Big
Props
question.
to whoever wrote that one. Nice
Big
job.
question. Yeah. Well, I mean, okay. So first of all, your New Jerusalem tells you that there's a moving. Okay, so this is a little crazy. God starts off in the Bible not having a body. We think, right? And then Jesus gets one, and then eventually it ends with not destruction, but the creation of this new Jerusalem, where God now lives in a city with Jesus, and everybody's like seeing God and seeing Jesus. It's like this is the trajectory, right? Now we know the trajectory is God with us, right? The relational, loving community. But there is very much this sense of a kind of a moving from a kind of a spirit to the physical, in which God's people are now physically present, imbued with the Holy Spirit, and we have a King who is both God and human, and
Yes.
It's just I think it's an interesting way that the story is moving.
Yeah, that's the kind of a craziness of the resurrection. The resurrection, real bodies being resurrected, living forever, not dying again.
Yeah.
That's physical. It's not ethereal or spiritual or anything. It's really physical. being with him, enjoying physical things with him forever and ever, never worried about sickness, injustice, or war taking that away from us, being with him. Mm-hmm.
And now this is a little speculative, because I think the question this person is asking is the nature of transformation, the ultimate purpose of human history. And if you say, okay, this is where I am speculating, God wants to get to that point. If God says, I want to get, and just, okay, I'm speculating now. Can we deal with speculation? Okay.
We call it an umbrella of mercy around here.
Whatever mercy, I'm fully wrong.
Yeah.
You try to understand what God is up to. If the New Jerusalem is what God's up to, if God's like, okay, I want to get here. I want to get to a place where I have a whole bunch of people who have gone through the suffering of this world, and they have chosen me. And then they choose to love me. I get to be with them. And they are my sons and daughters. They image me. They serve me. They reign with me. They love me. Awesome. That's where I'm trying to get to. And so then human history, as we know it from the fall all the way to, say, the final judgment, that period of time, it serves as the means to get there. Mm-hmm. If you think in those terms, like it's the crucible through which humans that God's looking for are now present. And people making choices, like, do they want to be with God? They don't want to be with God. Okay, fine. And then the ones who do want to be with God, they're moved on a transformative journey toward becoming sons and daughters of God, become Christ-like, and you kind of move forward.
I think what I like about what you're saying right now, if I understand what you're saying, is that it's all really about God. God's plan, God's glory, God's way, and that can be not appealing to a lot of people.
Yeah,
they want it really more about them, but really, if the Bible is true and we're right about all of this, it's really about God. Really,
it's Him getting what He wants.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Why should that? Because He's God, actually. He is God.
And I know, okay, maybe we can cut this out later if we need to, but we struggle with suffering, and we struggle with innocent suffering, and rightly so. But and I think you've done this in some of your sermons, Chris, about with that rope that's eternity, right? We focus so much on that short little red part of the rope, which is our life on this earth. And then we kind of go, you forget what eternity looks like. Mm-hmm. So much of our concerns are with this. And God's like, hey, you suffered and died. You have eternity with me. And that's going to be the biggest and most important part of your life. Mm-hmm. You're going to live 5 million years there and still go, I got a long ways to go.
This is why I like the stars. When we look up at night and we see these stars they're the light we're seeing from these stars are thousands of years old and stuff like that. It just gives us an idea that the universe is much bigger than we can possibly fathom. So God's plan for us is much bigger and grander than we can possibly ever fathom. We just whittle it down to a little room or mansion or something like that, and we don't understand the bigness of God. Yeah.
I think the progression from garden to city is interesting too. Like, we don't go back to a garden at the end of Revelation. So it feels like if things aren't all destroyed and we end in a city and not a garden, that all of this matters. Like, God's not just going to do away with His creation and start from scratch, but He loves us and He loves His creation and He's in it and He's going to redeem and restore it. And there's just something beautiful about this picture of a God who, no, this is my creation and I'm gonna fix this, and I'm gonna come and be with you and live in this place that was once broken but is now beautiful for all of eternity. Man, that's an amazing picture at the end of this book that we've been studying.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the articles that I recommended about New Heaven, New Earth, I think it's the Middleton one, could have been Moo one. It talks about this idea of creation, and the problem is that when we think creation, we think natural creation. We think plants and trees.
Mm.
And he says, no. You have to understand creation, within biblical theology, includes human culture. Includes human culture. And that's when he gets to, hey, New Jerusalem, the city. It's a city. Right? Think Madison, think Chicago, think bustling, vibrant, think creation of art and architecture, think science and engineering and so much human production.
Baseball games.
No, maybe not the Cubs. But
Maybe not the Cubs. Yeah.
Legos.
Legos, right? So you're like, wait a minute, the
yeah.
future isn't rustic.
yeah.
Because if you think garden, you're thinking rustic. You're thinking trees and plants. And that's great. If you have allergies, okay, new body, I shouldn't have allergies. But the redemption of culture, the redemption of human culture is a tremendous vision that when people go, I'm going to be bored, I don't think you understand. You don't understand what's going on here. So...
Yeah, I think it's in his book called Culture Making that Andy Crouch says that culture is the furniture of heaven. So again, even if it speaks to like what we do on a daily basis, there are eternal things that we get to be involved with every single day. And again, that, at least for me, calls us to a renewed obedience to Christ, which is what this letter is all about, right? Like if I can be obedient to him and resist the pull of Babylon and all of these different things, that man, this life matters, and I get to follow this Jesus who loves me and is going to make all things right at some point, and it's a beautiful ending to the story.
Amen.
That sounds like a great place to end this podcast. So
This might be a record for the longest podcast ever.
Yeah,
So
good. So Charles and Chris, thank you so much for coming on and for fielding these questions that we've had as a church. And Chris, the younger, I think this is our final episode of this series, of the Revelation series. And so we'll be back in the future with the different series. But Chris, thanks for hosting this with me.
Absolutely. And thanks for letting us grill you guys on all of these questions.
Great
They're hard
questions, too.
Yeah.
We didn't get to all of them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great questions.
Yeah.
Great.
Yep. So yeah, thanks for sending those in. We tried to get to as many of them as possible, right? But if you still have a burning question, feel free to still write podcast@blackhawkchurch.org. We've been responding to some individually as well, or find one of us on a Sunday morning. We're happy to chat more as well. So, all right, you guys. Well, that's all for this episode, and that's a wrap on the Book of Revelation. So thanks so much for tracking with us, both on the podcast and on Sundays. And I hope you have a great rest of the week.